Okay, so this is the second part of building the vector wireframe, and we're actually going to start creating the vector stuff now. I'm going to move my layer panel back down, and I'm going to dock it back down here next to paths and channels so that it's not in the way. What I think I'm going to do is draw out the sections, the sort of the basic bigger sections. And I'm going to start with the who we are part first. It's on the bottom. And I feel like it'll be easier if I just start there before I start on this other section. So, and I'm going to go down here to the vector tools, and I'm going to, instead of this ellipse, I'm going to use a rectangle. And I'm going to go ahead, it should just snap for me because I have the snap tool turned on. And if I let it up here, it's going to draw this big white section for me. And now I want to go ahead and name this rectangle here, and I'm going to call it, I like to call backgrounds things like BG because it's nice and short. So BG, who we are. Okay, and then that way it's really clear what this vector is. Now, one of the things you're going to notice is that it covers all of the template up. So how am I supposed to draw those other little vector shapes? Well, there are two ways you could deal with this. You could either toggle this on and off, because now you've got a name for it and you know what it is, so it's easy to turn it on and off. The other thing you could do is you could lower the opacity so that you can sort of see through it. Now, the only problem that I have with that is that if you do lower the opacity, and you forget to change it, that can actually really affect, like when you generate your web assets, or it can affect the way it looks. So I would prefer just to toggle the thing on and off. Yeah, so the other thing that I guess you could do also is if you wanted to put this preliminary sketch on top of everything and then just lower its opacity, as you're making your objects, you'll still always see this preliminary sketch thing, but I like to have mine underneath, so that's the way I'm going to do it. Now, something else that you notice that popped up is this properties panel whenever I drew my vector, which is really nice. If yours doesn't pop up, I would really strongly suggest that you look at that panel and make it something that's going to be available to you by maybe docking it somewhere or having it in the quick bar. And if you stick it right there, you'll see that that's the properties panel. It's really easy to access. I'm going to just make a change really quickly. Let's say that I accidentally drew it short. Maybe I drew it at 500 pixels for some reason by accident. So that's the height. If I dropped it like that, what you're going to find is that if you go and you take that move tool, or not that move tool, but the path selection tool, and let's say you try to pull it down, well, it's going to pull the whole thing down. It's not going to allow you to just rescale it. So what you could do instead, there are a couple of ways you could deal with that. One is you could take the direct path selection tool, and while the correct layer is highlighted, so this who we are vector is highlighted, you can draw a selection around these two bottom anchor points so that these two anchor points are selected, and now you can click, shift, hold, drag, and drop. That's the easiest way to rescale it. But the other thing that you can do too, I'm going to undo. So let's say that for some reason you didn't have guides drawn, but you knew that you needed it to be a very specific height, and you don't have the capability of snapping to something. The other thing you can do is you can go over here to properties, and you can see the dimension here. Well, if you don't know how high this section is, you can also use this handy little tool. It's under the eyedropper. If you click and hold, you can go to the ruler tool, which is really nice. And you can draw, and I'm going to hold down shift, you can draw a section and see how tall it is or how wide it is. And up in the options panel, it tells you the height is 880 pixels. And then if you want to get rid of this off the screen, you just hit clear. But now I know that while I've got that, first of all, yeah, while I've got my correct selection made, I can go here and I can change the height to 880 pixels, and it'll automatically change it for me. So those are two different ways that you can deal with that problem if you run into it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save that. Now the next thing is, I already said I want to turn that off because I want to go ahead and draw some other things in this layer. I could come back to this layer if I wanted to, but I'm already working in it, so let's just go for it, and then we'll move into the banner section. Now one of the things that I need to do here is I need to draw these boxes for my gallery images. What I want to do now is get out of this ruler tool, and I want to go back down to my my rectangle vector. But one of the things before I draw this is this is pretty important. I need to make sure that before I draw it, I am working within the correct folder. It actually, because I was on this vector that's in that folder, it would have just made another vector on top of it in the folder. It would have been okay. But it's a really good habit to always make sure of where you're drawing stuff, because later when it gets more confusing, if you start drawing without making sure that you're in the right place, you might leave orphans in weird places and it's going to be confusing and screw up your file. So let's go ahead and put this in the Who We Are group. And one thing that you'll notice on my diagram is, I don't know if you can see it very well on your screen, but I have the image taking up all the way into this right gutter, but then I have it starting again over here in the gutter that's, you know, for the right side. The problem with that potentially is that that might create a bit of a problem. I mean, you don't have to worry about that because the developer can kind of monkey around with it if they want to, but it might create a problem where it really shouldn't occupy the actual gutter on the end. So let's just say that I go here and let's try to draw it so that it's not in the gutter, but it's like actually like right there. And it drew it as an orange thing. I don't know if I want to keep it that way, but for now that's okay. And then here, let's start it not in the gutter. Let's start it in the actual column. All right. And then we've got something like that. And then, you know, you could always go back and change it. But as I said, this drawing is sort of just a guide. It doesn't have to be the exact thing. Now, that color, you know, is just sort of a placeholder for right now. It doesn't really matter, you know, but if you really wanted it to look sort of more visually appealing, you could go and change the colors of these things. I'm going to take the selection tool and like maybe this one, I have to actually select the layer too. So let's say that this is going to be the commercial image. Let's call it the commercial rectangle or the commercial gallery. Okay. And then this one that's on the right, let's say that that one is residential gallery because that's how they were in the drawing. All right. And so now I'll know what those two boxes are. So and then if you get confused as to which is which, you can always, you know, play around with that. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select, while it's selected over here in the layers for the vector, I'm going to select the object here. I'm going to change the fill color and I'm going to use that green that's in my palette. And, you know, maybe that's a little bit bright. So you could always play around with it and you could modify that color a bit if you wanted. You could also lower the opacity if you wanted so that it's got like a white screen in the background. But yeah, I mean, that is pretty bright, and it's very bright, in fact. So let's consider doing that. Let's make the fill a little bit paler, and also that way we can see through it a little bit. So let's just say that we're going to make the fill at like 50% for right now. And let's do it for both of them. Okay. And right now they're just objects that are holding a place. Now the other thing that's inside of here are some type layers. And I'm going to come back to the type and I'm going to do the type in a totally separate like thing for the entire page. Right now I'm just going to draw out the sections. Okay, so now that you have an idea of sort of how to get that to work and snap to grids and so forth, I'm going to go to where it says header now. I'm going to go back to my vector tool. And I'm going to first go ahead and draw this vector section. Okay, and that is going to be, let's change the color of that to like this light blue so it's not quite so bright. And that's going to be where ultimately a background image is going to go. And I'm going to name that, so let's call that BG banner or something image. Okay, so that's where that's supposed to be. And then the next thing that I'll do Oh, and see what I did? It didn't end up in the header for some reason. I don't know. I must have clicked off of it. So I just drug that back down into the header. It's really important that it stays there. So now with the header selected, I'm going to draw the next set up here. And it's going to be not orange. Let's pick, I think it's somewhere in here, maybe this dark color, maybe one of these gray colors. We'll figure that out. We can always go back and change that. All right, and then the other thing that we need to do is we need to place that badge. So this is where, let me go ahead and say, to be consistent, I can say BG nav. Okay, so I can tell at a glance if something is a background and then what kind of background it is. All right, then the next thing I want to do is, as I said, I want to place that badge. So go to File, Place Linked, and we're going to find that logo badge that we'd created. Okay, and you see it's kind of nice, at least on my screen. I'm not sure how it's doing it on yours, but it's putting it at least in the right place because it's sticking it, you know, pretty much right beneath this navigation bar that, well, what's going to be the navigation bar. And if I want to make sure that it snaps up to that, I can click and hold the Shift key and I can just, you know, drag it up. So it is snapped there. Now what I need to do is scale it, and I'm going to have to ultimately end up sort of moving it over because I'm going to use this to snap it to my guide. And it's actually not snapping to the guide for some reason. I'm not sure. Maybe I turned snap off and didn't realize it, but I'm not going to mess with it now. Anyway, so it's about the right size. I can always adjust it a little bit. It's not a big deal. And then there's my badge. And if I want, what I can do is, let's make sure, well, snap is turned on. Okay. And what I can do is now just take that move tool and I can scoot it over, holding down my Shift key. And it looks like it's not quite big enough. It's like not exactly fitting based on the way that my grid system is, so I can adjust it. That's not a big deal. So all I need to do then is go back up here to edit, transform, and then I can scale. And I'm going to make it a little bit bigger than my actual guide says because I want it to fit within the correct boundaries of my grid framework. This vertical height is less important than the side-to-side height. So I think that that's going to work out for me. All right, so now I've got my logo brand, and if I want to just really quickly hide, I can go to show, and I can hide the guides really fast and make sure that it looks right. Knocking this back. And I'm just going to keep on doing this same kind of thing for all of my sections. And so that you don't have to watch me do all of this, I'm going to snap my fingers, and suddenly all of the other layers will have been created with their vector objects. The thing that is missing now is the typography. So I'm going to really quickly show you what I did. So if you, let me go ahead and expand all of my layer groups. And I'm just going to breeze through it for a moment, and I'm going to scroll. And this is so far what I've got. I've just got all these objects made. I didn't crop it yet. But basically, whenever I add the type, it'll be a lot clearer what needs to happen. So I had to do a few other things, like I had to add some more guides, you know, to make this work out a little bit better. I, you know, had to make this the background of this button down here, things like that. And just quickly so that you could see, I turned off the backgrounds of some of the sections so you could kind of see what we did. This one didn't have anything else except for the typography, so I left it. But you can see how I had to deal with some of the form field things, and I placed a smart object from the original logo, not the logo badge, and made this button and so forth. Now, what you'll need to do before moving on to the next video for the type is you'll need to do all the stuff that I just did, and based on what I've shown you so far, you should be able to accomplish that.